on. I just knocked over my camera. I'm picking it up. Sorry about that.
Hi my lovelies, and welcome back to my channel. So in the last couple of weeks, my channel has seen a lot of growth after I talked about a kids channel called Sprout. Firstly, I want to say just thank you. Like I've already said it, but like I'm genuinely like still in shock. But after seeing how much you guys enjoyed that video, I got, of course, a ton of suggestions for other like children's networks. So because I really had so much fun with that video anyways, I decided to just, why not make it a series? After all of the suggestions I've gotten though, the one I arguably received the most was Noggin. So I feel like it's only fair we start there. Plus, like, I didn't even realize, but there are so many parallels with Sprout and Noggin, like, as we get into it. So I'm really glad it ended up being Noggin that I did next, because it just was really fitting to talk about it next in a way. But yeah, today we're going to be diving into the downfall of Noggin, its iconic mascots, and even find out what it's become in present day. To get right into it, similar to Sprout, Noggin was a kids channel that launched way earlier on February 2nd of 1999 as a cable channel with the help of Sesame Workshop, who was a co-owner of the channel as well. It was advertised as a thinking channel, whatever that's supposed to mean. Let me not be too hard on them, like the channel is called Noggin, I can't be surprised, but bottom line, the point of this channel was the shows were kind of meant to inspire imagination, if you will, and creativity, and of course, learning above all. Anyway, the initial brainstorming of ideas that would result in the creation of this channel began in 1995. See, this was the year that Paramount's Nickelodeon and Sesame Workshop both planned to create their own educational channels. Nickelodeon's idea at the time was called Big Orange, and Sesame's idea was called New Kid City. However, neither of these channels' development was ever finalized. They never came to fruition. This is important though, because Nickelodeon eventually decided to turn Big Orange into a 4-hour syndication package instead of an entire channel in 1997, and it was with that change where the name Noggin came into play. Noggin was named after a slang term for the head, reflecting its educational purpose. With these changes, Nickelodeon would go on to film a pilot episode to demonstrate the concept of the channel, but this syndication package never was finalized or aired on TV. As for Sesame Workshop, well, according to an article from the LA Times titled TV's Sesame Street Creators Want Their Own Niche on Dial, the New York-based not-for-profit corporation says launching its own channel is the only way to ensure it's home for highly acclaimed shows, which are often passed over by networks in favor of more commercially successful fare, such as Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and Animaniacs. The most recent example came in February when ABC canceled the Workshop's scientific cartoon series, Crow, after 2 seasons, even though its ratings were a winner in its time slot. So yeah, that's basically why Sesame Workshop was looking to start their own channel, because they believed, you know, they had good shows, they weren't being treated properly, fairly. So it makes sense after reading this article the following year in 1998, after finding out that Nickelodeon was also in the works of creating an educational channel, they ended up deciding to form a partnership with them and just merge their plans for educational channels into one channel, because that would just be smarter. And that one channel ended up still being Noggin. Now, even though I said kids channel when talking about Noggin, I would use that more like loosely, because, well, in the beginning at least, Noggin had more of a like wider audience range, being aimed at tweens, teenagers, and preschoolers. Though preschoolers were definitely the main target in the long run, as you know, we can tell, but Noggin always had a morning preschool block even before they were the focus of the channel's demographic, which makes sense since the content Noggin aired would consist of both series from Sesame Workshop and Nickelodeon libraries. And with an early morning block, you're probably thinking, oh, they had a nighttime block, right? Yep. There was it's called Retro Nighttime Block, where the channel would basically air reruns of classic educational series. I believe that this block was supposed to be more adult oriented. Like when I tried researching it, it was either unspecified, like who the target audience was. It obviously wasn't preschoolers, or it said adults, but I don't know if that's the case. I'm thinking probably like it skewed to like tweens, teenagers, that older kind of audience, but it was probably stuff that adults could still enjoy. I clarify that because I don't think this was something like Adult Swim. But it doesn't really matter though. It's not important in the long run of this channel and was later discontinued in 2002 anyways. Something notable about Noggin 2 was its mascots. Like, I don't even need to elaborate anymore. You know who I'm talking about. However, at this point in time was the Phred era of Noggin. Phred was basically this green colored like animated character, and yes, it's like Phred, like PH.
I'm Phred with a PH.
And Phred actually had multiple shows that he hosted. The first being Phred on Your Head show, which was actually like, I think Noggin's first ever kind of original show on the channel that wasn't like stuff from their libraries, and the URL Phred show. But this all was like a little bit before my time, so I don't know too much about it. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and this information was definitely news to me, hearing that they had a whole other, I knew there was mascots before, the ones we'll get into later, but I did not know about Phred specifically. Another notable thing was during the beginning stages of Noggin as a channel, they focused heavily, or like entirely actually, on short form content versus long form, which is funny to hear considering we're literally working in reverse now with apps like TikTok being like so popular that there's like Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts now. Long form is the way, I'm telling you. And the original short form content we got during this time included A Walk in Your Shoes, which was, it originally started as like a series of 3 shorts that aired during the Phred on Your Head show. A Walk in Your Shoes though would basically follow 2 real people from completely different backgrounds as they switched lives. I can already smell the comments about this next section. It's called the Wooten Observer, like Wooten like gluten. I could not have butchered it any worse, but in my defense, I'm so used to like woot being spelled like woot moo, like from Animal Jam. So yeah, I just wanted to take a moment to apologize. We also have the Houghton Observer, which followed a curious kid named Franny who delivers newspapers for the town of Houghton, and she wants to grow up to be a zoologist, so she like narrates her paper route like a nature documentary. I don't know anything about what's going on here, but the nature documentary thing has me sold. Next is arguably the most iconic. I've been wanting to talk about this show for a hot minute on my channel. I just haven't had an excuse to. But it's Oobi. Oobi was basically a show completely centered around hand puppets, which is inspired by a technique used by puppeteers when learning how to lip sync, in which they use their bare hands and a pair of ping pong like ball eyes instead of like a full puppet. Then there was Me in a Box.
What would happen if you put everything that sparks you in a box? Noggin presents Me in a Box.
Which in each short, a kid would like talk about themselves in like 1 or 2 minutes through a box of like personal objects and artwork they had gathered. And finally, we have Citizen Phoebe, which followed a kid named Phoebe who wanted to run for president. But just like their content was at the time, this was very short-lived. With Noggin transitioning into longer form content as early as 2000, with their earliest original lineup including classic episodes of Electric Company, 123 Contact, Crow, Square One Television, and Ghost Rider from Sesame Workshop's library, and then Wild Side Show, Nick News, and Doug from Nickelodeon's library. But before we move past this like very early era of Noggin, I have to mention the cool variations of the logo we saw on the channel. Obviously, the main objective of Noggin was, as we know, to inspire children's imagination and curiosity. One thing we'll notice throughout the changes that come with this channel though is its logo. From 1999 to 2019, Noggin used the very same logo, which was the bottom half of a smiling cartoon face. With the top of the head cut off, this design left a lot of possibilities for the upper half, and in fact the logo's upper half was often changed around a lot, from a beaker to represent science, flowers to represent the spring season, and even a special Oobi variation of the logo. They got extremely creative with this, and it truly showed, with hundreds of different toppers being designed for the logo over the years. For some more context, Noggin's logo was also featured like heavily in tons of original shorts and animations that ran like between shows on the channel. As a part of this like creative decision, Noggin's creative team hired various like independent animators to create station ID commercials in hopes that each animator could bring their own kind of personal design elements to the logo, arguably making like each one stand out, which was perfect considering their end goal was to make the logo look unlike any other network. But back to longform. Following this like longform shift, by 2001, original content actually made up 40% of Noggin's schedule. This was also the same year that Noggin would premiere shows like the URL with Phred show that I mentioned earlier. This show actually showcased viewers' submissions to the Noggin website. And then there was also Sponk, which was a game show centered around kind of like improv acting. However, this change would truly be most apparent in the following year when the channel was kind of reorganized into two blocks. A daytime block for preschoolers and a nighttime block referred to as the N for teens that lasted until about 2007 when they kind of merged together with Team Nick, but we'll get more into that later when we get there. So as you can imagine, Noggin's pre-existing tween targeted shows like A Walk in Your Shoes and Sponk would only air at night during the N now. The original shows for the N were also made by like the same creative team as like the daytime block programming. For example, Out There was made by Sesame Workshop, and Girls vs. Boys was also made by the same studio that made A Walk in Your Shoes. The N also featured a new fully animated comedy called Oh Grady, South of Nowhere, which was a drama, and various like one-season miniseries like LOL with the N, Real Access, and Miracle Boys. As for the new daytime preschool block, for exactly a year, from April 2002 to April 2003, Noggin introduced a new mascot to host this block, which was a blue character named Feetface.
I can't even lie, I expected this to fully be a talking foot.
I'm sorry, it's Nickelodeon, like what? But Feetface was basically a walking blue little icon thingy, and during Feetface's time on the channel, the only two original shows that were airing during the day were Play With Me Sesame, which premiered the very same day that like the reorganized blocks debuted on the channel. Something to mention about this show too was while it was originally made for Noggin, it would later be brought onto Sprout in 2007, which makes sense considering like the interactive aspect of this like Sesame Street spinoff. And the other show that would be airing during this time was Ubi, which yes started off as shorts, but Noggin ended up turning it into long form episodes, and Ubi would actually go on to be the longest running series on Noggin, for good reason too. The concept was just really unique and like unlike anything that had been done before. Now of course there were other like programming on this daytime block, but everything else excluding those two shows that I mentioned were like reruns, shows like Franklin, Blue's Clues, Macy. So in this footage, it sounds like I called the show Macy, but it's called Maisie, and it's iconic, so I just wanted to clarify. I mean, this show literally has a character named Tallulah in it. How could I not know what it's called? This is just ridiculous. Crow, Little Bear, and Kipper, which, oh my god, I got a shit ton of comments saying I forgot Kipper in my Sprout video. Funny enough, I thought I remembered Kipper from Noggin, but it stopped airing there back in 2003, so like there's no way I would have seen it because like I wasn't even alive. It probably was Sprout where I saw it. Like, fine, I guess you guys are right, but that's why I didn't include it. Also, it just never came up in my research once when I was like looking into shows on Sprout. But yes, I do love Kipper. But speaking of 2002, it was also in August of 2002 that Sesame Workshop ended up selling 50% of its stake in Noggin, making it fully owned by Paramount Media Networks.
Which is just so confusing to find out.
However, Sesame Workshop did continue a like co-production agreement with Noggin for several years afterwards. So as we get further into Noggin's history, it's like not really that confusing. It just seems like that at first. But as I said, this new block lasted exactly a year, which is because they had yet another revamp for their preschool block in 2003, which was pretty much due to a shift in creative directors and managers at the time. But I will say it's clear, like, one thing this channel really struggled with, like, from the beginning is its identity, with it taking like 2 tries to get mascots who would actually stay and stick with the audience. If it isn't obvious where this is going, we got like visual changes, basically the same thing that happened the year prior when they introduced Feetface, only we were saying goodbye to Feetface. 2 mascots in fact. First is Moose, who is a orange and yellow moose, and second of course is his best friend Zee, who is a blue bird who wears a pink flower in her hair. Even though they didn't become a part of the channel until like April of 2003, their first ever appearance was actually in a commercial where Noggin's previous host Feetface introduced them to the audience, and this commercial would run from late February to April of 2003 when they would like take over. It was then that Moose and Zee would officially start hosting the daytime block on specifically April 7th, 2003, and Moose and Zee would be the host for the remainder of this channel's time on TV. Over the years, there would be around more than 100 animated shorts featuring the dynamic duo of Moose and Zee. The format of these shorts was basically they would usually announce like what show was coming up next that day, and then they would do the animated short, and then the show that they said was airing would air. In these shorts, Moose would take on the role of a teacher, providing information and education between shows on Noggin, while Zee was supposed to kind of represent the audience watching that Moose was teaching. Now these aired like all year round, but they had like a lot of themed segments to correspond with like certain seasons and or holidays. Now when I was watching a compilation of these in preparation for this video, because like I didn't remember very much, my favorite thing was probably their outfits they'd be dressed up in, from the Eco Rangers to Moose's fabulous beach outfit to even taking an action-packed trip to the Letter Safari. And I can't forget there was that one time where Moose was dressed up like he was a part of Tumblr in 2014.
It's grating and irritating. Folks find it cloying too, but try as I might, I just can't stop myself annoying you.
Anyway, as a part of these changes to the preschool block, 2 new shows were actually created specifically for the block. These shows being Jack's Big Music Show in 2005 and the Upside Down Show in 2006. These shows are also 2 perfect examples of shows Sesame Workshop continued to help, again with that co-production agreement in place. We'll also mention, I was actually 8 months old when Jack's Big Music Show was released.
Sorry, I just really enjoyed making people feel old in my last video.
Like, I literally turned 19 in like 12 days? I think by the time I'm posting this. Once this like new era of Noggin began to establish itself, the channel decided to become completely devoted to preschool content, and in 2007, The N became its own channel due to the fact that like, again, these are 2 very different target demographics. They were just too different. Now, I was researching for articles from this time to reference in this video, and this is a real quote in regards to like how different these 2 demographics were from the vice president of production and programming at Noggin. I have a very schizophrenic job. Let's not. Funny thing is, was very confused why this article was closing every time I tried to open it, even though like it was showing up when I was like Googling stuff. Then I found it on the Wayback Machine. I get it now. Please, anyone who has schizophrenia, let me know how you feel about this quote. That's obviously not my place to speak. It left a bad taste in my mouth and I wanted to acknowledge it, because why are we using mental illnesses as an adjective? It's just a trend I've seen. Like, even recently, people use mental illnesses that they don't have as an adjective all the time. And so casually too in this article. Like, what? Oh, wait, right. It's 2004. Back to better things though. Remember how I mentioned Teen Nick earlier? Well, when this rebrand started on Noggin, initially the N was still a part of that network. But as the years went on and like obviously they established themselves as a preschool channel, the N's programming was just gradually phased out and then switched to its own separate channel in 2007. However, domino effect, the same thing happens on this channel, where basically the N's content was once again gradually taken over, this time by Teen Nick reruns. It wasn't until September 28th though of 2009 that Teen Nick and The N officially merged into one channel called Teen Nick. So in other words, The N basically just became Teen Nick because they took the name and they took their programming. I know The N isn't really like relevant to most of this video, but I just want to say I find it really weird how I've never heard of The N, despite the fact that it was home for shows like Degrassi, which I've never seen, but I know it's really, really popular. Degrassi is a Canadian show, and its home was The N in the US. That's how people were watching it. I think Degrassi is probably the reason The N like even had any viewership at all, besides like the Teen Nick reruns. But yeah, this information will be important later. Keep it in the back of your head, or should I say, noggin.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
For now, though, let's focus back on the beginning of Moose and Zee's side of Noggin. Now, the Feetface era of Noggin was a little bit underwhelming, as we've kind of sensed, but after this rebrand with Moose and Zee was when the channel finally started to, like, take off. Noggin was so successful, in fact, that they began to take PBS Kids viewership, which is partly why Sprout ended up being created at all, to compete with them for that demographic. And not to be a downer, but you know, Sprout in the long run did end up lasting longer than them, for good reason. They truly fumbled the bag with the N. I can only blame the N for this. While they did this split demographic programming, Sprout was the first ever 24-hour preschool channel. And no, the N wasn't like Adult Swim where it comes on around like 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. It would come on at like 5 p.m. when kids are still awake.
Let me go back to being positive, damn.
We're gonna get into the downfall in a minute, but throughout the next years on Noggin, we had tons of amazing programming that I grew up with. We had various shows including the following: The Backyardigans, Pinky Dinky Doo, Blues Room, Dora the Explorer, Go Diego Go, Oswald, Whoopi's Little Berg, The Wonder Pets, Gullah Gullah Island, 64 Zoo Lane, Bob the Builder, Connie the Cow, Lazy Town, Maggie and the Ferocious Beast, Max and Ruby, Miffy and Friends, Miss Spider's Sunny Patch Friends, Olivia, Toot and Puddle, Tweenies,
I'ma play with the tweenies. Hey, hey, what do you say? Come along and play with the tweenies.
Peppa Pig, Wow Wow Wubsy, Yo Gabba Gabba, and the infamous Rubba-Dubbers.
Rubber stands, we rise again.
Also, thank you guys for validating me in my Rubba-Dubbers obsession. Never in my life would anyone know what I was talking about when I would, describe the show Rubba-Dubbers. That was such an overflow of nostalgia, like just listing off the names of their programming. Truly on the surface, things seem to only be going up for the network, especially after deciding to phase out the N to run their preschool programming 24/7. But unfortunately, it was just a little too late by that point. On February 23rd of 2009, we saw what was the beginning of the end for Noggin when Nickelodeon announced that Noggin, well, would be changing the name. Specifically, Noggin would be renamed to Nick Jr., named after the block they had with the same name. Their intentions with this were to bring the channel like in line with Nickelodeon brand identity. I can only guess this is because like by this point Sesame Workshop had all hands in on PBS Sprout, and Nickelodeon had the most control over the shows they'd helped co-produce, and it didn't make sense to keep like such a neutral name that was out of line with like their other channels they had. So from this point on, Noggin would be on hiatus until 2015. Technically it's more like 2012 to 2015 because after this name change the programming was pretty much the same, like we still got our Moose and Zee segments and everything, but it became clear as time went on that Moose and Zee were only still around to truly ease the transition into Nick Jr. Moose and Zee would stay for 3 more years before eventually being canned entirely, with ads taking their place on the channel without any kind of warning to parents whatsoever, by the way. This would officially happen on March 1st of 2012, and let me clarify that they did, like when I say ads, I mean they did more clearly Nick Jr. branded segments with other characters from the network, like the Bubble Guppies, for example. I think this article by the Tampa Bay Times on the issue explains it best. A preschool mom I know said she always liked Moose and Zee because they seemed less commercial, and they weren't pitching a certain show, and that seemed to be the overriding sentiment. People liked Moose and Zee because they didn't feel overbearing, because they weren't like directly a part of any shows, and with their time slots on the network, they taught educational lessons. So understandably, finding out this news, parents were completely outraged. Not only was a change.org petition made which amassed over 14,000 signatures to bring the duo back to the channel, but parents were letting Nick Jr. have a piece of their mind over on their Facebook page. So let's read a few of their thoughts, shall we? Via an article titled "Parents Rip Nick Jr. for Firing Moose and Zee." Where are my child's best friends in the entire world, Moose and Zee? She would love to have her friends back. And oh, by the way, she is starting to make new friends on Sprout, and until Moose and Zee are back, they may become permanent friends. I love Nick Jr., but you changed, and so will we. Boycott, that's the word of the day. What happened to Moose and Zee? And why is Yo Gabba Gabba only on at 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. in the morning? Why did Nick Jr. change up the showtimes for all of the shows? I want Moose and Zee back. What is going on? Where are Moose and Zee? You can rebrand the channel without getting rid of them. They taught wonderful lessons between shows, and now I just have ads telling me to go to your website? I'm not at the boycott stage, but I really don't understand. My daughter misses her friends. You're probably wondering, oh, like they released a statement, right? Right? Unlike Sprout, who at least had like the decency to inform their audience when they decide to unrightfully fire someone, Nick Jr. only had the audacity to say this on the matter. According to Nick Jr.'s website, the characters your child already knows and loves, like Dora and the Bubble Guppies and Millie, Geo, and Bot from Team Umizoomi, will guide the audience throughout the day and offer fun educational content. Moose and his pal Zee are stepping away from the bright lights and cameras to focus on new plans of their own. Already know and love, why are we acting like Moose and Zee are new additions to the channel? For crying out loud, Moose and Zee are older than the Bubble Guppies and Team Umizoomi. The audacity you have, honestly, to disregard their impact like that just because they weren't a part of a show airing on your network? That's quite literally the whole point of Moose and Zee, is that they aren't tied to a show. That aside, would have been a power move to do this and then announce they're getting their own show like a year later, but you know, Nickelodeon would never be smart enough to do something like that. And after this point, with the elimination of Moose and Zee, Noggin was pretty much dead as can be. Well, until 2015. On February 25th of 2015, Nickelodeon revealed, or technically Viacom talked about this in January too, but the point is, it was announced that Noggin would be relaunched, but this time as a mobile streaming app, and subscriptions would be priced at $5.99 per month. The app would officially be launched within days of this announcement on March 5th of 2015. With the launch of the Noggin App too, Nickelodeon brought back the classic Noggin logo, branding, and music from the preschool block. And the most exciting part of this app by far was it brought back our favorite mascots, Moose and Zee, for a short period of time. For the next 4 years, Moose and Zee would host as mascots on the app up until 2019. And what happened in 2019, you may ask? They ended up implementing design changes once again. And with these design changes, the Noggin app was actually given a new logo, which marked the end of like Noggin's first logo after 20 years. So we can only guess, yeah, Moose and Zee were also retired as a part of these changes and stopped hosting the app in 2019. So same concept as like when Noggin was changed to Nick Jr., they were basically around to kind of ease people into this transition. Really unfortunate because they taught great lessons. Then in March of 2020, the Noggin original shows the app had originally included were then removed from the app? What is the reason? So ironically, we're practically back where we started, just like what happened to the Noggin channel itself. The app basically became overtaken by the Nick Jr. lineup and characters once again. Though, in 2021, the service introduced a new half-hour educational show called Noggin Knows, and a series of shorts to go with it called The Noggins. This featured their new teal color mascots, also called The Noggins. I'm at a loss for words. How can we be so back again, and then just literally throw all of that away for the most boring, blandest set of characters I've ever seen in my life? They don't even have any originality. They all look the same, which is all of them being this same bright-ass obnoxious shade of cyan teal. Also want to bring up the point that them looking the same isn't necessarily a bad thing. It is because they're so bland and there's no originality here. But there are groups of characters where this works. Like, off the top of my head, I'm gonna say Smurfs. In conclusion though, Noggin may be back, but that's all that's back, just the name Noggin. Noggin is once again a shell of what it once was, and it's likely at this point that what we had in 2015 to 2019 was the last we'll ever see of that Noggin again. The most recent thing to happen in relation to Noggin though was at the beginning of this month, a new interactive learning world was added to the Noggin app called Nogginville. With this feature, they added 15 new minigames to the app, and I think you can create your own avatar in this game, though it's kind of unclear from what I was reading. I'm also realizing that I'm so old that maybe there's just characters I'm not recognizing. Maybe what I thought was an avatar in the game is actually another Nickelodeon branded character, because the Nickelodeon branded characters are within this Nogginville universe. Specifically, I noticed the Bubble Guppies the most. But yeah, that was the downfall of the Noggin channel. I really hope you guys enjoyed, and thank you guys for suggesting this one. I never really realized the parallels it was gonna have with Sprout, because obviously you're not thinking about competition when you're just watching a kids network.
As a kid.
But boy, they were practically enemies. And Sesame Workshop basically ditched Noggin for Sprout. Researching this channel truly just gave me more reasons to dislike Nickelodeon as a company. But let me know in the comments memories you have associated with Noggin, or the mascots, and if you have any other topics you would like to see me cover, I actually have a Google form that is linked in my description where you can submit them. Thank you guys for such an amazing year on this channel. I have so many fun ideas planned for next year, and speaking of that, I will see you guys in the new year.
Straws are the bendiest, time is the spendiest, cards are the
books are the lendiest.